Phew.
So, yeah.
All right.
As you know, nothing's wrong. Everything's fine. Sean's a little nervous. Her speech, which she wrote out, has disappeared as she was printing it. It just disappeared and deleted from her computer. So she'll be fine. She's using it Friday at 4. So
She knows this project.
she knows this project well. So Sean Newberry is the next student we'll be talking about. I'll talk about in a second, but I want to introduce Todd Perry, who is the other committee member here. So let me start out by just saying that this is a project about designing for wellness in the broad context of this. And more specifically, this is about designing transition spaces for our returning military men and women from deployment. And so that's the more specific within project within this larger range. So what I'm going to do is lead you downstairs. We'll be going through dip space. We'll be entering a very dark space. There'll be a few little lights on the floor that we will follow and stand as close together in the center. I will warn you, we will be in the dark, and there will be loud noises. So, your heart or whatever. I haven't seen this yet, so I don't want anybody to have that's
What
so,
kind of
that's
loud
what-
noises like?
I haven't heard them yet, so.
Okay.
So,
It's not experiencing
it's
lust
experiencing-
and attraction. We might experience fear.
Yeah, we get everything.
So to get that, so very much from the
Thank you
beginning,
for-
so just to sort of give you that sort of heads up, all right? So I'll lead you down, get you where Sean told you, to make you stand, and then we'll go through that, and then the lights will come on, and we'll go through the individual project, all right?
Thank
Okay.
you very much.
So if you want.
All right, well, we'll go first. So you're sitting down front. Nice. Chivalrous of you.
I'm waiting for you guys to go. If you survive that. You say Sergio while you're out there?
Almost there.
I wanted to debrief with him and then.
Probably fine.
It's not like I don't know what everything is. It's like how the install happened.
You got protection.
Just don't trip over my tripod.
Here's the X. Where's the X? I know, so slowly.
Follow the wall.
It's really dark. I'm afraid that
A little bit, so I've got my hand out.
Sean
Just go a little bit closer.
I'll put a camera over here somewhere. I'm trying to get to my tripod. Hopefully nobody's tripped
All
over.
right, so I think at this point, it's sort of like everyone's sort of on the center, so we'll just sort of.
I think it's impressive.
I'm sorry. Well, we're both. Yeah, where's the X? Where I'm standing on the X. Right?
You all have to stand.
Okay?
There's no sitting.
All right.
Now I see you.
See
Okay.
the X?
Are you guys ready?
Go for it.
Okay. So to me, anything to do with veterans is personal. My grandfather was in the U.S. Navy in the early 1950s. Tom, my father, served in the U.S. Army. He's actually here in uniform. Not in the Army uniform and police uniform. And stationed in Germany at the end of the Vietnam War. My kid brother Josh, who's not here today, was deployed to Iraq in 2010 where he helped maintain security for convoys. My cousin spent 3 tours in Iraq and one in Kuwait as a construction engineer for the Army, building the structures that the rest of the soldiers used throughout the campaign. My boyfriend Chris was deployed to Iraq twice in 2 major cities in the early 2000s, where he lost a lot of friends as well as a part of himself. I also have many other friends and distant relatives that have been in one branch or another of the U.S. military. Being a soldier and serving our country is a passion that runs deep in my family, so when it came time to pick a topic for my thesis, it came as no surprise that I chose a focus that was so embedded in my family's identity. I'm gonna apologize right now. I had a technical snafu about 20 minutes ago where I went to print my actual speech, and literally it disappeared as I was trying to download it off of my cloud drive. So I'm taking a speech I wrote a few weeks ago as a preliminary speech and adapting it, so forgive me as I jump around a little bit. So the name of my thesis is Coming Home, Developing Intentional Community for Combat Veterans. The thesis question I have put forth and have tried to answer, or at least start a conversation about with this thesis, is how can a better understanding of combat spatiality and the social ramifications of the unitized structure in which modern ground troops exist enable architects to create more supportive places for veterans as they leave the military and integrate into a civilian-dominated society. Soldiers experience space completely differently than civilians. They are constantly analyzing every inch of their environment for possible threats. Whether in the form of a human being or a pile of trash, they have been trained to perceive the slightest nuances that could indicate danger. It is not possible for one person to be completely aware of everything in a given moment in any given location. For this reason, Marine and Army ground troops have been taught to operate in small teams to ensure the safety of themselves as well as their comrades. The smallest group that most soldiers and Marines will ever fight in is a fire team. This is comprised of 4 people, or depending upon the size of your deployment, 3 people. No matter how, this is comprised of 3 or 4 people, with 1 in command and the other 3 each having a specialty that they perform to ensure the success of the team. No matter how well trained a service member is, one person can never effectively monitor their entire environment. In a fire team, each service member only has to cover a fraction of the surroundings in which they find themselves, creating a safety net of sorts for each other. Larger groups such as squads, platoons, companies, the battalion, the regiment, the division, and the entire ground combat elements within the Marine Corps and the comparable thing for the Army are made up of different groupings of this 4-man group, 4-person module. Chris, the next one. The current model of training for all branches of the military involves an intense amount of spatial displacement. So I'm spatially displacing you guys right now. As a recruit, you are removed from your home and sent somewhere completely unfamiliar to begin your training. Boot camp is often one of the hardest things you will ever experience. The separation from everyone you know and love, the multitude of new rules and regulations and standards to which you are now held, to put lightly, is a bit of a culture shock. After basic training comes advanced individual training for the Army, School of Infantry for the Marines, and A School for the Navy. These are where these men and women learn exactly how to perform their military occupational specialty. After AIT, SOI, or A School, active duty soldiers move on to the post they are stationed at. Deployments are an entirely different can of worms. Not only are you yet again removed from anything that feels familiar and you've come to know your base as familiar, but you are thrust into a world of enemy combatants who are literally trying to kill you and everyone around you, often on a daily basis. All of this leads to veterans of foreign wars having a very transient lifestyle for several years of their life. And I will get into what the case studies mean later. But this right here is an example of the different spatial displacements that 5 soldiers that I interviewed have dealt with. There's 2 layers, and if you're gentle, because my entire presentation is held together with double-sided tape, you can lift it up and see the different levels of detail. The bottom layer is, well, the top layer is lifers, basically. Anybody who was in for 15 to 20 years or longer. So they have a completely different experience in the military versus people who are not in for life. They have a much more transient short term, even though the typical contract is 6 to 8 years, usually 4 years active duty and 2 years, 4 to 6 years active duty and 2 years in active reserve, which is basically when you go home and you don't really do anything, but you're still technically part of the military, and they can call you up at any time and say, you need to come back, we have a thing you have to go do. All right, Chris, next one. As I mentioned before, ground troops are trained to notice the tiniest of details in their surroundings that could be a cause of danger to themselves or others. Before going on deployment, members of the Navy are sat in a room and shown a bunch of slides and tested on them. Easy, right? We do that all the time, at least in school we do. Not like this. They're presented with the image of a village or a city street or something indicative of the environment they will be deployed to. They are told to study this image, and then it is removed from the screen. The next image is the same, but altered. They are tasked with finding every little detail that is changed, whether that is a pile of trash potentially containing an IED, which is an improvised explosive device, or the amount of people in the street. They have to find everything. This process continues, increasing in speed until the soldiers can pick out the slightest differences at the drop of a pin. This is the only way they will survive in the field. That training is meant to keep them and their comrades alive, and it is more successful than not. But when these men and women return home, they are faced with a new problem. They haven't been trained to not think this way. Piles of trash on the sidewalk in New York City will not contain an IED, and a random person approaching you on the street doesn't mean that they are a suicide bomber. Many veterans experience what is called hypervigilance, which causes them to find threats in everyday normal life in the civilian world, and this complicates their reintegration process. This is where I'm jumping. So throughout my process, I interviewed. Oh, hang on, Chris, turn this one off. Okay, no, turn that off too. Leave everything off for a moment. So this is the part of the speech that I seem to have lost. Throughout my research, I started with traditional research, reading articles, reading books, kind of doing the normal thing that you do when you do research. But I found that the information I was really looking for was exactly how veterans handle themselves in space after they've been deployed. Whether they experienced traumatic issues or not when they were gone, they're always affected, whether it's from somebody else that they know having a problem or dealing with something extraordinary in those extraordinary circumstances, or whether they themselves faced a problem. And so what I came to find was that information on that doesn't exist, or there's very little of it. I found one article that even remotely touched on it, and it was actually a research project done by an architect at Perkins & Will in Atlanta, which was really pivotal in me kind of directing my research. And so that kind of led me to realize that, through the process of reading and not finding my information, in the process of constantly berating my boyfriend, who is a Marine, he was a Marine, there's no such thing as an ex-Marine, who was a Marine, my father who was in the Army, my brother who was in the Army, I would wake up in the middle of the night and ask Chris questions, and he would yell at me and tell me to go back to sleep. And I call my dad at all hours of the night, I call my brother at all hours of the night, and then my external advisor, who up until last week was the Veterans Resource Center director here. He just got a job at the VA in Atlanta, New Orleans. He left last week, so he can't be here today. They were all very instrumental in me finding direction and finding input. And I realized that the only way to really get the information I needed was to actually participate and interview veterans. The problem with that, which I didn't know was going to be such a long and arduous but incredibly educational process, was that interviewing veterans, specifically about combat experiences, falls into the realm of research with human subjects, which is a very closely regulated and
So diplomatic.
well, I was getting to the incredibly obnoxious process to go through. I ended up having to submit 2 different applications to the Institutional Review Board and becoming quite an expert at it, and I actually educated my cohort about it at one of our seminar meetings. And basically, I had to get the approval to interview the veterans. I had to submit a list of interview questions and outline every single detail of the research of my protocol, which you will get to in a minute. So, besides interviewing them and finding out really interesting information, like the fact that on base, the only people who use a game room or a barbecue are newbies who don't have any friends yet, or that 80% of the veterans who are going to inhabit the place that I'm designing probably need to go out for a smoke break every 5 minutes. It was an incredibly interesting process. So I interviewed them, and then there was a second participatory bit to this, which I will touch on in just a moment. But all of that really led me to understand that the military structure, which you have highlighted to your left behind my father, is really the driving force in everything that the military has to do with. The structure where they depend on each other, and the fire team to the squad to the platoon, that's the key. And I knew that that was the key to my project as well. And so that led me to understand that I really needed to look at what the community of veterans needed and looked like. So I knew that I was doing a residential project. Perfect. Okay, so upon deciding to do a residential project, I have to pick a site. I need to know where I'm building this, and kind of use it as a laboratory to test a series of rules that I've given myself about what a veteran needs, what it takes to build a good community, and stuff like that. So just for what a community of veterans really needs was, I looked at a lot of research about access to outdoor environments, greeneries, plantings, parks, stuff like that. There was a really interesting article I read when I first started researching that said something to the tune of people who are exposed to views of nature out their hospital window will heal X times amount faster than people who are exposed to like a building wall outside of their window, stuff like that. So I really wanted to be able to provide the people that I was providing a service for with a lot of opportunities to get outside, exercise, play with their dogs, hang out with their friends, and really do stuff outside. And all of the veterans I know personally love being outdoors. I also, because it's Portland, wanted it to be close to mass transit and really easy for them to get to the VA hospital or clinic. Because one of the hardest parts about veterans getting the health care that they need from the VA is getting to their appointments, whether that's because they're physically handicapped and they can't drive, or they don't have a car, or they don't have a license because they have some sort of mental handicap, that they've like a traumatic brain injury. So I set myself a series of rules for my site, which was the required ones where it has to have multiple public transit access points nearby, and this one, as you can see from all my little buses, there's plenty. 30 to 45 minute travel time to the Veterans Administration Healthcare Facility. Going east, I had to think about it. Going east, you've got a 12 to 18 minute commute by car, 30 to 39 minute commute by bus, and 37 to 45 minute by bike. Going west towards Hillsborough, there's a small clinic out there, 16 to 26 minutes on car, 65 to 69 bus. Stretches a little when you get to the bus and the bike, but I also know that most, from the research I've done and from the veterans I know, most of them are pretty independent, and the majority of them have their own cars. And then it also had to be near a major grocery store, and this is simply because when you're in the military and you're stationed on base, you have everything provided for you, and one of the hardest things is to really be able to meet your own material needs afterward. And so there's like a New Seasons, a Fred Meyer, and a Safeway, all within like a quarter mile. The preferred neighborhood conditions I set myself was to have a low crime rate in the surrounding area, be close to outdoor activity areas, which I already touched upon, and have easy access to a downtown core, suburban hub, or town center, simply to get them out of their apartments or their houses and do something with other people, because a huge part of the problem with the reintegration process is isolation and missing the people that you were in with. For the actual site specifically, I wanted it to have 3 or more acres, mostly for the zoning, because I wanted to be able to get it dense if I wanted to. I hadn't determined that at this point, and existing and established trees. Okay, this is another part where I'm jumping around. Chris, I think the next one is the charrette. So before I touch on this, after I determined I was doing a residential project and I determined where my site was, I set myself a list of goals I needed to do with this site. And the 3 main goals I have are to create a community of individuals, since they haven't had to be individuals for a long time, but give them the resources they need socially to be able to lean on people when they need to create somewhere that helps them, gives them opportunities for wellness, what it really means to be well as a veteran, because that doesn't look the same after war and after your combat experiences, or even after your military service as it did beforehand. And then my last was to really consider the details of the place, whether that's materials that it's built out of, simple things like cabinetry, closers that don't slam, little things like that. And then, to bolster my design, I really didn't think that this project could be valid if I didn't actually engage veterans in the design process. Since the majority of them do not have an architectural background, oddly enough, a couple of them did, I put them through a design charrette, very small scale, intimate. It was actually usually one-on-one, and I tried as hard as I could to make it convenient for them, and I went to them most of the time. This is a participatory exercise, I will admit, to stealing from Snowhead. I went to a workshop they had recently, and they had a very large-scale version of this. So I simply put the descriptor word on the top with a pretty image, and then all of the different programmings that I was thinking about that I felt that this should have, to see which ones really resonated with them and which ones didn't. And obviously, judging by the fact that half of them don't have an arrow from them, some of them didn't resonate, which enabled me to eliminate those from my designs. I also asked them about their preferences in materiality and aesthetics. Do you like that, Nicole? I did. And what you can see here, which was really interesting to me, like 60% of the interviewees chose very simple looking things like, wood siding and simple and clean building lines. They also, the majority of them preferred neutral color palettes. There was not anybody who chose a color, which was very surprising to me. As well as, again, just very honest and, simple things, nothing too crazy, and stuff like that. So, after all of that research and figuring out all of this stuff, engaging with the veterans, I moved on to my actual design. Rather late in the game, actually. So this is my overall site plan. My site, which I didn't specify when I was talking about this guy, is located right at the intersection of Beaverton Hillsdale Highway, Old Sholsbury Road, and Olson Road in the Raleigh Hills neighborhood. It's on a pretty green, lush site. Right now, it's actually 3 lots. You can kind of, if you get close in a little bit, you can see the lot lines, 4 lots, excuse me. One of which is vacant, one of which has an abandoned house that needs to be knocked down, and the other 2, I'm just saying because of thesis, I'm knocking them down. So I've taken the site. It has a naturally occurring slope from the southeast corner, going to, oh, there is a north arrow. I forget for a second, I realized I didn't think I had one. From the southeast corner to the northwest corner. And obviously, as Barbara says all the time, dirt's easy to move. So I just moved it around and did what I needed to do with it. The site is organized into a series of hubs or partitions, I guess you could call them, to really emphasize the goals that I'm trying to achieve.